One wrong call at 3 a.m., $50,000. A dying billionaire who needed someone real. And a desperate nurse who had nothing left to lose. Maya Crawford agreed to fake being his fiancé for one dinner. She never imagined that the biggest lie of her life would lead to the only truth that ever mattered. Before we dive into Maya and Ethan's story, I need to ask you something. Have you ever made a choice you knew was wrong but felt like the only option you had? Drop a comment below. And if you've ever felt invisible in your own life, this story is for you. Stay with me until the end, because what happens next will completely change how you see love, sacrifice, and second chances. Let's begin. Maya Crawford had forgotten what it was like to sleep through the night. Not literally, of course. Her body still remembered those distant days before Sophie's leukemia, before the bills that piled up like an insurmountable mountain, before her life transformed into a race against time she never seemed to win. But it had been so long that deep sleep had become a hazy memory, something that belonged to another person in another life. The emergency ward at St. Mary's Hospital at 3:47 in the morning had that heavy quietness that comes just before the storm. Maya knew this silence. 15 years working night shifts teach you to read the signs, the way the air becomes denser, as if the hospital itself were holding its breath before the next trauma came through the automatic doors. She was at the nursing station, her eyes burning with exhaustion as she reviewed charts, when her personal cell phone vibrated in the pocket of her worn scrubs. She almost didn't answer. Calls at 3 in the morning never brought good news. Her first thought flew to Sophie. She had left the 8-year-old with Mrs. Chen, the elderly neighbor, who watched her during night shifts. Maya's heart raced as she pulled out the phone, already imagining the worst. But the number on the screen wasn't familiar. It wasn't Mrs. Chen's, nor the children's hospital. It was a local number, but unknown. "Hello," her voice came out rougher than intended, weighted by night without proper sleep. There was a pause on the other end. Not the pause of bad connection or normal hesitation, but something more deliberate, as if the person were calibrating each word before pronouncing it. When the voice finally came, it was male, deep, with that perfect diction that Maya had learned to associate with people who never needed to shout to be heard. "Are you a nurse at St. Mary's?" The question was direct, without preamble. Maya frowned. "Who's speaking?" "If this is some medical emergency, you should call 911. It's not that kind of emergency." The man cut her off, but not rudely. There was something in his voice, an exhaustion that rivaled her own. "Perhaps I need. This is going to sound completely insane, and maybe it is, but I need a nurse. Not for medical care. I need you to pretend to be my fiancé." Maya's wound stout. She looked around the nursing station, checking if any colleague was nearby to witness what she was certain was an elaborate prank. The only other person in sight was Dr. Martinez, hunched over a computer 3 stations away, completely absorbed in his own tasks. "Excuse me, what?" Maya felt a nervous laugh rising in her throat, that kind of laugh that comes when something is so absurd your brain can't process it properly. "I know how this sounds," the voice continued. And Maya detected something that made her not hang up immediately. Genuine vulnerability, perhaps, or desperation. "My name is Ethan Blackwell. My grandmother is dying, and she has one last wish, to see me happy, settled, with someone who truly loves me, and I don't have that. I don't have anyone real. But she can't die thinking I'm alone. I can't do that to her." Maya should have hung up. All her self-preservation instincts, sharpened by years living on society's edge, screamed at her to end that conversation. But there was something in the way he said, "no one real," as if he knew people by the dozen, but none who truly counted. She understood that kind of loneliness, though it came from a completely different place. "Mr. Blackwell," she began, choosing her words carefully, "I do want to know how you got my number, or why you think I'd be the right person for this. Peculiar arrangement, but $50,000, he said without beating around the bush, "for one night, a few hours, actually, a dinner with my grandmother. You just need to sit beside me, hold my hand, make her believe I'm capable of being loved by someone genuine. $50,000 transferred to your account today." The air left Maya's lungs as if someone had punched her. $50,000, the amount echoed in her mind, ricocheting against every financial worry that kept her awake when she should be sleeping. $50,000 would cover Sophie's next 3 rounds of chemotherapy. Would cover the experimental medications insurance refused. Would cover the overdue rent. The electricity bills that arrived with threats of disconnection in menacing red letters. The credit card debt that grew like a living entity. But it was insane. It had to be a prank, or worse, something dangerous, predatory. Rich men didn't call unknown nurses at 3 in the morning, offering fortunes for innocent favors. That didn't happen in the real world. "How did you get my number?" Maya asked, her voice now firm, the practical nurse overriding the desperate mother for a moment. Another silence. "You took care of my driver 6 months ago, Albert Grayson. He had a heart attack. You saved his life." He never stopped talking about the nurse who held his hand all night, even after the danger passed. Who talked to him about his daughter, who made him feel human when he was terrified. He kept your business card. I need someone like that, someone who knows how to make a person feel less alone. Maya vaguely remembered Albert, a gentleman in his early 60s, kind who had cried when he thought he would die before seeing his granddaughter be born. She had, in fact, stayed beyond her shift that night, because no one should face the possibility of death completely alone. But what kind of person kept a nurse's business card for a moment like this? Maya searched for the right word. Unconventional. I know. There was something like a bitter smile in his voice now, but I'm out of conventional options. And I have a feeling you understand what it means to be out of options. It was a low blow, but it hit home. Maya looked at the phone in her other hand. The wallpaper was a photo of Sophie smiling before the diagnosis, when her hair still fell in brown curls over her shoulders, before chemotherapy transformed her into a smaller, frailer version of herself. $50,000. One night, a few hours pretending to be someone she wasn't it so different from what she already did every day? She pretended to be fine when she was falling apart. Pretended to have energy when she was exhausted. Pretended to have hope when fear threatened to consume her. I need to know more, Maya heard herself saying, surprised by her own voice. Much more, and I need guarantees. Contract, legal protections, everything documented. Of course, Ethan responded immediately, and she could hear the relief in his voice. My lawyer will prepare everything. You can bring your own lawyer to review. I'll pay the fees. But Maya, he used her first name, and something about the familiarity sounded strangely intimate coming from a stranger. I need an answer by noon tomorrow. My grandmother. She doesn't have much time, and so, at 3:52 in the morning on an ordinary Tuesday, Maya Crawford found herself at an impossible crossroads. On one side, all the rules she had lived by until then. Work hard, be honest, don't take dubious shortcuts. On the other, her daughter's face, too pale, too tired, too young to know so much pain. When she finally hung up, 5 minutes later, having agreed to at least meet Ethan to discuss details, Maya didn't know if she had just made the best or worst decision of her life. What she knew was that the night had just gotten much, much longer, and something told her that sleep would continue to be a distant luxury for quite some time yet. The coffee machine in the break room was broken again, but Maya served herself anyway, the dark, lukewarm liquid falling into the disposable cup. She needed something to do with her hands, something to focus on besides the whirlwind in her head. Outside the window, the city still slept, oblivious to the fact that for Maya Crawford, everything had just changed with a simple wrong call. Or perhaps it wasn't wrong after all. Perhaps it was exactly the kind of call the universe makes when you're on the edge 1 second before falling. Breakfast at Maya's apartment was never really breakfast. It was more a survival ritual. Burnt toast because she always got distracted watered-down orange juice to make the carton last. Longer and the forced smile she sculpted on her face every time Sophie came down the stairs dragging her feet with that exhaustion no 8-year-old should know. "Mommy, did you sleep?" Sophie asked, her large dark eyes studying Maya's face with that unsettling perception that illness had given her. Sick children grow up too fast on the inside, Maya had learned. They see things that should remain invisible for a few more years. Of course, sweetheart. The lie came out smooth, practiced. Maya placed the toast on Sophie's plate, having scraped off the most carbonized parts. Slept like a baby. Sophie didn't seem convinced, but didn't insist. She never insisted anymore. There was a silent resignation in the girl that broke Maya's heart into new pieces every day. It was 9:20 in the morning when Maya's phone rang again. She had just dropped Sophie off at Mrs. Chen's house. School was out of the question on bad days, and today was a bad day. "Maya Crawford," she answered formally, though she already knew who it was. "You thought about it. It wasn't a question." Ethan Blackwell's voice sounded different in daylight, less ghostly, more solid, but it still carried that weight, that quality of someone who had been holding something too heavy for too long. "I've thought of little else," Maya admitted, surprising herself with her own honesty. There was something about his voice that extracted truths she would normally keep. Perhaps it was because he had already seen her vulnerability, not directly, but through the bills he had certainly investigated. There was no point in pretending strength when someone had already seen your cracks. And there was expectation in his voice, but also something more fear, perhaps, as if he were already preparing himself for rejection. Maya stopped on the sidewalk, watching Seattle's morning traffic pass in a blur of metal and rush. All those cars, all those people, each carrying their own invisible burdens. How many of them would do what she was considering? How many already had? "I need to understand something first," she said, her nurse voice emerging. That clinical objectivity she used when she needed to ask difficult questions to frightened patients. "Why me? You're a Blackwell. I've heard that name before. Your grandfather owns half the pharmaceutical companies on the West Coast. You could hire any professional actress, someone trained for this kind of ... performance. Why call a public hospital nurse at 3 in the morning?" Ethan was silent for so long that Maya thought the call had dropped. But then he took a deep breath, and when he spoke, there was a raw quality in his words that made something in Maya's chest tighten. "Because everyone around me are professional actors," he said simply. "My family, my friends, and I use that term generously, the women my grandfather and grandmother parade in front of me as potential wives. They all have roles, masks they wear so well, I don't even know anymore if there's anyone real underneath. My grandmother, Eleanor, she's the only person in my world who can still see through masks. She knows when I'm lying, so I need someone who isn't lying." "But I would be lying," Maya pointed out, though she knew she was arguing against her own interests. "I'd pretend to be your fiancé. That's literally a lie. It's different," Ethan insisted, and she could hear him moving, perhaps walking. There was a slight echo, as if he were in a large, empty place. "You wouldn't be pretending to be something you're not. You'd be exactly who you are, a genuine person, someone who knows how to care for other people, not because they're paid to, but because that's who you are. Eleanor will see that. She'll see that you're real, and that's all she needs to see." It was manipulative, Maya realized. He was using her own virtues against her, wrapping them in an elegant rationalization that made wrong seem almost right. But there was something sincere to a loneliness she recognized, because she carried it inside herself. $50,000, Maya heard herself saying, testing how the words sounded out loud. "For a few hours of pretending, you realize how absurd this is." "I do," Ethan responded promptly. "But do you realize what this says about my life? That I need to pay someone to pretend to care about me enough to make an elderly lady happy for a few hours? Believe me, Maya, I'm more aware of the absurdity of my situation than you'll ever be." There was bitterness there, but also self-awareness. Ethan Blackwell wasn't deluding himself about what he was asking. When Maya asked and knew in that moment, she had already decided. The question wasn't if, it was when, and they both knew it. "Friday night, dinner at 8, my driver will pick you up at 7:15. A contract will be delivered to your home by noon tomorrow. Every detail, every protection you mentioned." He paused, "And Maya, the money will be transferred before dinner, not after. You won't have to trust that I'll well pay. You'll already have the money before you walk through my door." That surprised her. "Aren't you afraid I'll just take the money and not show up?" Ethan laughed, but there was no real humor there. "No, because you're not that kind of person. That's why I chose you." Maya felt something strange move in her chest. It was disturbing to be seen so clearly by a stranger. She had spent so much time being invisible that having someone really looking was almost uncomfortable. "You'll need a dress," Ethan continued, "something appropriate. I'll send a stylist tomorrow afternoon. And before you protest, this isn't charity, it's wardrobe. Part of the job." He was making it easy for her, Maya realized, giving her ways to justify this as something less sordid than it might seem. "All right," she agreed, her voice colder now. "But let's make one thing clear, Mr. Blackwell. I'll do this because my daughter needs treatments. I can't afford, not because I think it's right or because I'm impressed with your money. This is a transaction. I understand that. I hope you do too." There was a moment of silence, and then Ethan said softly, "I understand perfectly, and I appreciate your honesty. It's more than I get from most people." When they hung up, Maya found herself standing in the middle of the sidewalk, people flowing around her like water around a stone. She had just agreed to do something that 6 hours ago she would have considered impossible. Her phone vibrated again. A text message from a number she now recognized. "Thank you for giving me a chance to make my grandmother happy. I know this doesn't erase the fact that it's strange, but it means something to me." Maya typed a response and deleted it 3 times before finally writing, "See you Friday. Simple, professional. No unnecessary emotion." But as she put away her phone and continued walking toward the hospital, Maya couldn't stop thinking about his voice, about the way it sounded lonely even when talking to someone. In 72 hours, she would enter a world she only glimpsed through the glass doors of private hospitals. And for a few hours, she would pretend to belong there. But afterward, when the clock struck midnight, she would have $50,000, and Sophie would have a chance. And that, Maya decided, was real enough to be worth all the lies she would have to tell first. The contract arrived in a black leather folder delivered by a suited messenger who seemed genuinely uncomfortable delivering the package. To an apartment building where paint peeled from the walls and the elevator had an out-of-service sign hanging for 3 months. Maya signed the receipt and closed the door, leaning against it for a long moment before gathering courage to open it. Inside were 23 pages of meticulously drafted legal text. Confidentiality clauses, payment terms, specifications about the duration of the engagement, legal protections guaranteeing that no photographs would be taken without her consent, that her identity would be protected from any media leaks. There was even a section detailing what constituted acceptable behavior during dinner. Nothing physical beyond holding hands, a chaste hug if necessary, no expectation of anything beyond presence and polite conversation. It was simultaneously reassuring and deeply disturbing. Reassuring because every protection she could have imagined was there, written in impenetrable legal language. Disturbing because the existence of these clauses meant that someone, at some point, had needed them. Maya was on the 3rd paragraph of page 7 when Sophie appeared in the living room, dragging her favorite blanket. The girl was too pale. Her lips had that slightly bluish tone that made Maya's stomach turn. "What's that, Mommy?" Sophie asked, her voice small and curious. Maya closed the folder quickly, perhaps too quickly. "Work paperwork, sweetheart. Boring adult stuff. Another lie to add to the collection growing like weeds in fertile soil." Sophie curled up on the couch next to Maya, her head finding that perfect space between shoulder and chest that seemed designed specifically for her. Maya wrapped her arm around her daughter, feeling the prominent bones through the thin pajamas. Sophie had lost more weight. Dr. Rashid had mentioned it at the last appointment, his voice carefully neutral in a way doctors use when news is ungood but is unbad enough for total alarm yet, "Mommy." Sophie's voice was sleepy now, that constant fatigue pulling her down like an invisible anchor. "Yes, my love." Mrs. Chen said, "You're working too much. Said you need to rest too, or you'll get sick." There was a worry in the girl's voice that no 8-year-old should carry. "I don't want you to get sick." Maya felt something break inside her, a clean, silent fracture, the kind you only notice later when you try to move and discover something essential is no longer working right. "I won't get sick," she murmured against Sophie's thin hair. "I promise. And you know what? Things are going to get better soon. They're going to get much better." It wasn't a lie, Maya told herself. $50,000 would make things better. Drastically, it would allow Sophie to receive that experimental treatment Dr. Rashid had mentioned, the one not covered by insurance, the one that cost more than Maya earned in an entire year. Sophie fell asleep right there, her small body relaxing against Maya with that absolute trust children have in their parents. Maya held her daughter and looked at the leather folder on the coffee table, its corners perfectly aligned, the leather so expensive it probably cost more than the couch they were sitting on. She thought about Ethan Blackwell, about his voice at 3 a.m, carrying that kind of loneliness money can't buy. She thought about Eleanor, a dying grandmother who just wanted to see her grandson happy before leaving. She thought about Albert, the driver who had kept her business card, who had seen something in her worth remembering. And she thought about herself, Maya Crawford, 38 years old, registered nurse, single mother, woman who had done everything right and was still sinking. She had gone to nursing school with student loans. She was still paying. Had chosen a public hospital because she believed in serving underserved communities. had been careful with money, responsible, hardworking. And where had that left her, holding a dying daughter, while bills piled up like tombstones in a financial cemetery? The system she had faithfully followed was failing her in every possible way. So perhaps, just perhaps, it was time to write her own rules. When Sophie woke an hour later, Maya had already read the contract 3 times, had photographed each page and sent them to a friend who had graduated in law before dropping out to become a paramedic, someone who understood both legal language and desperation. And when her phone rang at 4 in the afternoon, she was ready. "You read it?" Ethan asked without preamble. "I did, 3 times." Maya kept her voice steady, professional. "I have questions. I expected you would." There was something like approval in his voice. "Shoot, Clause 12, Section B, says, if at any time during the engagement I feel uncomfortable or unsafe, I can leave immediately and still keep full payment. Is that real?" "Absolutely." Non-negotiable, Ethan's answer was immediate. "Maya, I need you to understand something. This may be transactional, but I'm not a monster. You're not a prisoner. If at any moment you want to leave, the door is open." Maya paused, processing that. Clause 17 talks about photography. No social media, no photographs without explicit consent. But what about your grandmother? She wants photos, surely. Eleanor doesn't use social media. She's 86 and thinks Instagram is a type of telegram. There was a smile in Ethan's voice now. If she wants a photo, you'll have total control over whether you agree or not. And if you do, those photos remain private, in her home, never digitized. It made sense. Maya moved on. "The payment? It says here it will be transferred at 6 o'clock Friday evening, 2 hours before dinner. Why not after? Why risk me simply disappearing with the money?" Ethan was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer. Because if the roles were reversed, if you were the rich person asking someone desperate to do something uncomfortable for money, wouldn't you hate spending those hours wondering if you'd be paid, worrying that in the end, after doing what was asked, the promise would evaporate? It was surprisingly empathetic for someone who had grown up with so much privilege. "You really thought this through," Maya said. "Not exactly a question." "I thought about many things," Ethan admitted. "I know how this looks, Maya. I know I'm asking something strange and putting you in a difficult position. The least I can do is remove as much risk as possible from your side." Maya looked at Sophie, still hypnotized by cartoons. She thought about the bank statement she had checked that morning, the negative numbers screaming in digital red. She thought about conversations with Dr. Rashid, about his careful pauses, about his gentle suggestions, about quality of life versus aggressive treatments. "All right," she said finally. "I'll do this. I'll sign your contract and show up Friday and pretend to be your loving fiancé for your grandmother." But Ethan, she used his first name for the first time and felt the strange intimacy of it. "If this is some kind of trap, some cruel game rich people play for fun, I swear I'll find a way to make you regret it. I don't have much, but I have principles. And I have a daughter who taught me to fight for things that matter." "It's not a trap," Ethan said quietly. "It's just a lonely man trying to give the only person he loves one last gift before she leaves. And yes, it's strange. And yes, there should be a better way. But this is the way I have, so it's the one I'm using." When they hung up, Maya held the phone for a long time, staring at the black screen. In 72 hours, everything would change. For better or worse, she had just made the decision that would define the next chapter of their lives. The limousine that arrived in front of Maya's building at 7:15 on Friday was so out of place that 3 neighbors came out to watch. The driver, not Albert, but a younger man named James, held the door with a carefully neutral expression as Maya entered, the navy blue silk dress whispering against her legs. The stylist had appeared as promised, bringing 6 options that cost more than Maya's car. They had chosen the simplest, elegant without being ostentatious, expensive without screaming about it. Maya still felt like an imposter wearing it. The drive to the Blackwell estate took 40 minutes, the city gradually giving way to suburbs and then something grander. Iron gates appeared, then a tree-lined driveway whose branches formed a canopy over the road. When the mansion came into view, Maya had to consciously remember to close her mouth. It wasn't just big, it was the physical manifestation of generations of accumulated wealth. Creamy limestone windows that gleamed like diamonds under carefully positioned lights. a fountain in the center of the circular driveway that probably cost more than the entire house where Maya grew up. James opened the door, and Maya stepped out, her heels clicking against the perfect cobblestones. The front door opened before she could reach it, revealing a man in an impeccable suit. Butler, Maya supposed, though she had only seen butlers in movies. "Miss Crawford," he said with a slight nod. "Welcome, Mr. Blackwell. Awaits you in the sitting room." Maya followed him through an entrance hall that echoed her footsteps. Past artwork she vaguely recognized from art history books under a chandelier that hung like a captured constellation. Everything was immaculate, perfectly arranged, not a single thing out of place, and completely, absolutely lifeless. There were no family photos on the walls, no books left open on tables, no sign that real people lived here, laughed here, existed here as anything beyond well-dressed ghosts moving through pretty rooms. The sitting room was different, smaller, warmer, with a crackling fire in the fireplace despite it being spring. And there, standing near the windows, was Ethan Blackwell. He turned when she entered, and Maya had her first real glimpse of the man whose voice had become strangely familiar. Tall, maybe 6'1", with that lean build that came from good genetics instead of ours at the gym. Dark hair, darker eyes, and a face that could have been sculpted, if not for the way it carried tension in every line. He looked tired, Maya noticed with her nurse's perception. Not just physically tired, but tired in a deeper way. Maya, her name sounded different when he said it in person. "You came. You sound surprised." Maya kept her voice light, though her heart was beating uncomfortably against her ribs. $50,000 appeared in my account at 6 o'clock sharp, as promised. "I'm many things, Mr. Blackwell, but not someone who breaks agreements." "Ethan," he corrected, moving toward her. "If we're going to convince my grandmother we're in love, you should probably call me Ethan." He stopped at a respectful distance, studying her with disconcerting intensity. "The dress is perfect. You look like you belong here." "We both know I don't belong," Maya said frankly, "but I can pretend for a few hours." Something passed across Ethan's face, perhaps admiration, perhaps sadness. "Your honesty is refreshing. Everyone here spends so much time pretending they've forgotten what truth sounds like." "Must be exhausting," Maya said, and surprised herself by realizing she actually felt something like sympathy. "Always wearing a mask. You have no idea." Ethan paused, then asked, "Can I offer you something to drink? We have time before dinner." "Eleanor likes punctuality, but we still have 15 minutes." Maya accepted a glass of wine that probably cost more than her monthly rent and let Ethan guide her through expectations for the evening. How they had met, he had decided on a story where she had cared for him during an emergency appendicitis 6 months ago, which explained why no one in his family knew her yet. How the romance had blossomed through late-night conversations and her refusal to treat him differently because of his last name. "Eleanor will test you," Ethan warned. "She's sharp as a knife, even at 86. She asks questions designed to trip you up to see if our story has holes. Then it's good it's at least partially true," Maya pointed out. "I am a nurse. I do care for people. The part about not treating you differently because of your money is also true. I'm not impressed by wealth, Ethan. I'm impressed by character." He looked at her for a long moment. "And you still don't know if I have any." "Not yet," Maya agreed. "But I'll find out tonight." A clock somewhere chimed 8 times, and Ethan offered his arm. "Showtime," he said softly. "Thank you for doing this, Maya. Whatever you think of me afterward, please know this means more than I can express." Maya placed her hand on his arm, feeling tense muscles beneath the perfectly cut suit. As they walked toward the dining room, she wondered what version of truth she would find on the other side of that door, and whether, when the night ended, the man beside her would prove to be different from the perfect, lifeless crystal world that surrounded him. The door opened, revealing a formal dining room with a table that could easily seat 20 people. But tonight, only 3 places were set, 2 together on one side, 1 on the other. And at the head, sitting perfectly upright, with posture that decades hadn't bent, was Eleanor Blackwell, her eyes sharp and assessing despite age fixed on Maya like a hawk spotting prey. And Maya, a nurse, accustomed to assessing patients in seconds, immediately recognized something essential. This woman was no fool. This woman saw everything. And tonight would be much more complicated than any contract could have prepared her for. "So," Eleanor said, her voice surprisingly strong, carrying echoes of authority that age hadn't diminished. "You're the woman who captured my grandson's heart." It wasn't a question. It was a challenge. And the game, Maya realized as she forced her best smile, had officially begun. Eleanor Blackwell didn't blink. Maya noticed that immediately, that predatory quality of someone accustomed to dismantling lies with a single penetrating look. The matriarch studied Maya for a moment that stretched uncomfortably long before gesturing to the chairs. "Sit, the soup gets cold, and I detest cold food." Her voice carried the kind of command that didn't expect to be questioned. Ethan pulled out Maya's chair, his hand brushing lightly against her back. A performance for Eleanor, Maya knew, but the touch still sent an unexpected spark through her skin. She sat hyper-aware of every movement, every facial expression. "So, Miss Crawford," Eleanor began as soon as the first course was served by a silent server who appeared and disappeared like smoke. "Ethan tells me you're a nurse at St. Mary's, a public hospital." Interesting career choice. The way she said interesting made it clear it wasn't a compliment. Maya felt Ethan tense beside her, but she kept her voice calm. "Not everyone sees caring for people as a choice, Mrs. Blackwell. For some of us, it's a calling." Maya held the older woman's gaze. St. Mary's serves communities no private hospital would touch. People without insurance, without resources, but with the same need for care as anyone else. Someone has to be there for them. Eleanor raised a perfectly drawn eyebrow. Noble and idealistically naive. "The world runs on money, dear, not good intentions." "Funny," Maya replied before she could censor herself. "I thought the world ran on people. Money is just what we invented to keep score." Silence fell over the table. Ethan went completely still, and Maya wondered if she had gone too far, if she had blown the entire charade before it even began. But then something extraordinary happened. Eleanor laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but a genuine laugh that transformed her austere face into something almost warm. "She has spine," Eleanor said to Ethan, but her eyes remained on Maya. "That's new for you. The last three you brought here agreed with everything I said, as if they were afraid to use their own voices." "Maya isn't afraid of much," Ethan said softly, and there was something in his voice that made Maya look at him. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Surprise, perhaps, or admiration. "It's one of the things that ... that drew me to her." The lie sounded too true. Dangerously true. Eleanor returned her attention to the soup, but Maya could feel the interrogation was far from over. "How did you meet?" Ethan was vague on details, which usually means he's hiding something. Maya took a deep breath, remembering the rehearsed story. He had appendicitis. Arrived at the ER at 2 a.m, trying to convince everyone it was just indigestion. She let a small smile touch her lips. "Rich men are just as stubborn as poor ones when it comes to admitting they need help." "That's true," Eleanor agreed, an amused glint in her eyes. "Continue." "I stayed with him during pre-op. He was scared, though he tried to hide it. I held his hand, talked to him about silly things to distract him, TV shows, books we'd read, places we'd like to visit." Maya found herself speaking more easily now, weaving truth into fiction. "After surgery, he kept coming back. Not for medical reasons, just ... showed up. Brought terrible coffee from the cafeteria, sat in the waiting room waiting for my shift to end." She looked at Ethan and found him looking back, something unrehearsed passing between them. He was persistent. She was impossible to forget, Ethan added, his voice softer. The way she treated every patient like they were the most important person in the world. The way she could find humor even in the darkest situations. And the way she called me a spoiled idiot when I complained about hospital food. Maya choked on her wine. "That part wasn't in the script." "I didn't call you a you did," Ethan interrupted, and there was a smile playing on his lips now, something genuine breaking through the polished facade. "You said, and I quote, Mr. Blackwell, you're a spoiled idiot if you think hospital food should taste like a 5-star dinner. People are dying 3 doors down, and you're complaining about mashed potatoes." Eleanor was laughing again, and this time Ethan joined her. And Maya, despite herself, felt something warm in her chest. This wasn't what she expected, this strange ease, this accidental chemistry that wasn't in the contract. "I like her," Eleanor declared, pointing her fork at Maya like a scepter. "She's real." "You've finally brought someone real home, Ethan." Dinner continued. Course after course of food Maya could barely taste because she was too busy navigating between truth and lies. Eleanor asked questions about everything. Maya's childhood raised by single mother, absent father, all true, her education nursing school with student loans. True, her hopes for the future here Maya had to improvise, speaking vaguely about making a difference, about finding happiness in simple things. And through it all, Ethan's hand found hers under the table. Small touches that should be performance but felt like they carried real weight. The way their fingers intertwined naturally, how his thumb traced absent circles on the back of her hand. "Do you love her?" Eleanor asked suddenly, her eyes fixed on Ethan with laser intensity. Ethan didn't hesitate. Yes, the word came out simple, direct. But something in his eyes when he looked at Maya made her heart skip. "She makes me want to be better than I am." Eleanor nodded slowly, satisfied. "Good, because I'm dying, as you know, and it would be deeply inconvenient to die worrying that you'll end up alone and miserable." "Eleanor," Ethan began, but the older woman cut him off with a gesture. "No, let me speak while I still can." She turned to Maya. "My grandson is complicated, Miss Crawford. He grew up in a world where everything has a price, including affection. That made him cynical, cautious. If he chose you, someone who clearly comes from a different world, then you must be extraordinary." Maya felt tears prick her eyes unexpectedly. Eleanor's sincerity, the way she loved Ethan despite seeing his flaws, it was beautiful and heartbreaking simultaneously. "He's lucky to have you," Maya said quietly. "Not everyone has someone who really sees them." Eleanor reached across the table, her age-spotted hand covering Maya's. "Take care of him. He needs it more than he'll admit." When dinner ended and Eleanor retired to rest, Maya found herself alone with Ethan in the sitting room again. The silence between them was dense, loaded with unspoken things. "You were amazing," Ethan said finally. "Better than I could have hoped." "Eleanor, never. She's never accepted anyone like that." "Because I was honest," Maya said, "as much as I could be." Ethan nodded, something complicated crossing his face. "I should take you home now. The agreement is over. You fulfilled your part." But neither of them moved. And Maya realized, with something like terror, that she didn't want to leave. Not yet. This crystal world had cracks, and through those cracks, she had glimpsed something real. Something that scared her precisely because it wasn't in the contract. Maya should have left. The agreement was fulfilled. The money transferred, Eleanor convinced, but when Ethan suggested they get some fresh air on the terrace before James took her back, she found herself saying yes. The back terrace of the Blackwell mansion overlooked gardens that looked like something out of a magazine, illuminated by soft lights that created dancing shadows among the rose bushes. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of jasmine and something sweeter Maya couldn't identify. Ethan handed her his coat, a simple gesture that felt surprisingly intimate, and leaned against the stone balustrade, looking into the darkness beyond the garden lights. 6 months, he said suddenly, his voice so low Maya almost didn't hear. "That's the prognosis the doctors gave me. Rapidly progressive Huntington's disease. Hereditary, incurable." Maya felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "What? That's why Eleanor is so desperate to see me settled. She doesn't know about the disease. No one knows except my doctors and me. But she senses something is wrong. Mothers and grandmothers always sense." He finally looked at Maya, and she saw raw fear in his eyes. "I'm dying, Maya, and the only thing that matters to me is that Eleanor goes in peace, believing I won't die alone and unhappy." Maya processed this, her nurse mind automatically cataloging symptoms, treatments, prognoses. Huntington was brutal, progressive neurological degeneration, involuntary movements, cognitive decline. And he was right. There was no cure. "That's why you chose a nurse," she said slowly. "Not just because I was genuine, but because I deal with death. Because you thought I would understand." Yes, the admission came out like confession. People spend their whole lives pretending death doesn't exist, but you face it every day. "I thought you'd be the only person who wouldn't run from the truth." Maya should be furious. He had omitted crucial information, manipulated her emotionally. But looking at him, this man who had everything and nothing at the same time, she only felt deep sadness. 6 months, she repeated, and you're spending that time pretending for your grandmother instead of fighting. "There's nothing to fight for," Ethan said bitterly. "Believe me, I've investigated every option. Experimental treatments, gene therapies, everything. My own pharmaceutical company is developing something, but it's years away from being viable. I don't have years, so what? You just give up. I'm not giving up. I'm choosing how to spend the time I have left. He turned to her completely now. And tonight, dinner with you and Eleanor was the first time in months. I felt human instead of just a walking death sentence. Maya understood then why the chemistry between them had felt so real. It wasn't acting. It was two shipwrecked people recognizing the wreckage in each other. You want to know why I really accepted your money? Maya heard herself saying, My daughter has leukemia, Sophie, 8 years old, brown hair, smile that used to light up entire rooms before chemotherapy stole it. Her voice broke, but she continued. The treatments insurance covers aren't working. There are experimental therapies, but they cost a fortune. $50,000 buys 3 months of those therapies. 3 months of hope. Ethan studied her, understanding passing across his face. So we're both trying to save someone we love. Except you can be saved, and you're choosing not to fight, Maya said, frustration bleeding into her voice. Sophie is 8 years old. Ethan, she'd fight if she could. You have resources, access, and you're wasting it. It's not that simple. It never is. Maya took a deep breath, forcing herself to step back. It wasn't fair. She didn't know his whole story, had no right to judge his choices. I'm sorry, it's not my place. Silence fell between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two strangers who suddenly saw each other with brutal clarity. What do we do now? Ethan asked finally. Eleanor will want to see us again. She'll expect this relationship to continue. Maya had no answer. The agreement was for one night, but nothing about this night had gone according to plan. Real feelings had bled through the edges of their carefully constructed charade. I don't know, she admitted, but Eleanor deserves to die in peace, and Sophie deserves to fight. So maybe we continue this a little longer. Not for money, I don't need more money, but because ... double quotes, she hesitated, searching for words. Because for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone tonight. Ethan reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers, not for performance this time, but from real necessity. Me neither. They stood like that, to people on the edge of different abysses, holding each other under a sky full of stars they couldn't see through the city lights. And Maya knew she had just crossed a line from which there was no return. This was no longer a business agreement. It had become something infinitely more complicated, something that could save them or destroy them completely. A week passed in a blur of surreal normalcy. Maya returned to her night shifts, to the bills that never stopped coming, to the routine of caring for Sophie while pretending the world hadn't fundamentally changed. But it had changed. $50,000 sitting in her bank account changed everything. Dr. Rashid had been visibly surprised when Maya scheduled an appointment to discuss the experimental therapies. Mrs. Crawford, these treatments aren't covered by insurance. We're talking about, I know what they cost, Maya interrupted gently, and I can pay, at least for the first 3 months. He didn't ask how. Doctors who work with desperate families learn not to ask certain questions. He simply nodded and began preparing the papers. Sophie would start the new protocol on Monday. Finally, after months watching her daughter wither, Maya had a real weapon to fight with. She should be ecstatic. But something heavy had settled in her chest since that night at the Blackwell mansion. Guilt, perhaps, or the unsettling feeling that she had started something she didn't know how to finish. Ethan had sent messages. Nothing invasive, just simple check-ins asking how Sophie was. If Maya needed anything, she responded briefly, keeping distance, reminding herself the agreement had ended. They owed each other nothing now. Then Eleanor appeared. It was Tuesday, mid-afternoon, and Maya was at the nursing station reviewing charts when one of the receptionists called her. Maya, there's a lady here asking for you, Eleanor Blackwell. Maya's heart sank. Eleanor shouldn't be here. This wasn't part of the plan. The matriarch was seated in the ER waiting room, as out of place as a diamond in a pawn shop. She wore a perfectly tailored Chanel suit, every white hair in place. But Maya immediately noticed the pallor, the way she held her cane a little tighter than necessary. Mrs. Blackwell, Maya approached cautiously. Is everything all right? Are you feeling ill? Sit down, Miss Crawford. Eleanor gestured to the chair beside her. Her voice had that same quality of command, but there was something more underneath now. Disappointment, perhaps, or cold anger. Maya sat, awareness growing in her stomach like nausea. I hired a private investigator, Eleanor said without preamble. Not because I suspected you specifically, understand, but because I've learned through decades of experience that people lie. Especially to the Blackwells. Maya said nothing to say. Imagine my surprise, Eleanor continued, her voice dangerously calm, to discover that you met my grandson for the first time exactly 8 days ago. Not 6 months ago. Not through a romantic appendicitis, but through a financial transaction. $50,000 transferred to your account the day of our dinner. Maya's world narrowed to just Eleanor's face, those sharp eyes that now contained not the warmth she had seen at dinner, but something much harder. He paid you, Eleanor said, and now Maya could hear the pain beneath the anger. My grandson paid you to pretend to love him through an elaborate charade, to make me believe, in my final months of life, that he had found happiness. It wasn't like that, Maya began, but Eleanor raised a hand. Don't insult my intelligence with more lies, Miss Crawford. I know exactly what it was. She paused, something complicated crossing her face. What I don't know is why. Why would he do this? Why would you agree? Maya closed her eyes, tears burning behind her lids. My daughter is dying. Leukemia. The treatments that could save her cost more than I'll earn in my entire life. And Ethan, ... He just wanted you to be happy before you died. It wasn't about hurting anyone, but it did hurt, Eleanor said quietly, because for a few hours, I believed. I believed my grandson had found someone real, someone who saw him beyond the money and the name, and that gave me hope. Now that hope is gone, and what's left is worse than having no hope at all. Maya opened her eyes, finding Eleanor looking at her with something like pity. I'm sorry, she whispered. God, I'm so sorry. Eleanor nodded slowly, as if arriving at a decision. Here's what's going to happen, Miss Crawford. I'm going to pay for all of your daughter's treatments. Every penny, every experimental therapy, everything she needs, the best doctors, the best facilities. I'll ensure Sophie Crawford has every chance to survive. Relief flooded Maya so intensely she almost cried. Thank you, But Eleanor cut her off, and the word fell like a guillotine. You will never see or speak to Ethan again. No contact, no explanation. You'll simply disappear from his life as if you never existed. Maya froze. Why? Because he doesn't need distractions in his final months. Eleanor's voice was firm, but Maya saw the lie in her eyes. Eleanor didn't know about Ethan's disease. He needs someone from his own world, someone who can actually build a life with him. You're a kind distraction, Miss Crawford, but you're not suitable, and deep down you know that. It was cruel and classist and absolutely devastating because it had a grain of truth. Maya didn't belong in Ethan's world. They came from different universes. And if I refuse, Maya asked, though she already knew she couldn't, not when Sophie's life hung in the balance. Then your daughter gets only what your insurance covers, Eleanor said simply. And we both know that won't be enough. It was emotional blackmail at its most brutal level. But it was also a mother doing anything to save her daughter. Eleanor understood that Maya could see it in her eyes. They were both women making impossible choices for people they loved. He'll want to know why, Maya said, her voice breaking. He'll think I used him. Better he think that than cling to something that can't have a future. Eleanor stood, leaning heavily on her cane. You have 24 hours to decide, Miss Crawford. Your daughter's life, or my grandson's heart. Choose wisely. Maya didn't sleep that night. She sat beside Sophie's bed, watching her daughter's chest rise and fall with that shallow breathing that had become her new normal. Each inhalation seemed like a negotiation with the universe. One more, please. Just one more. At 6 a.m, when gray light began filtering through the thin curtains, Maya had made her decision. Not because she wanted to, but because she had no real choice. Sophie was everything. Sophie was the reason Maya breathed, worked, existed. And if disappearing from Ethan's life meant Sophie would live, then there was no decision at all. There was only the obvious terrible sacrifice any mother would make. At 7:15, she called Eleanor. I accept your terms. A wise choice. Eleanor's voice was professional, emotionless. My lawyer will contact you today with details about Sophie's treatments and Miss Crawford. Thank you for doing the right thing. The right thing. The words echoed hollow in Maya's ear after they hung up. It didn't feel right. It felt like being torn in half, one part of her going in one direction while the other half screamed to stay. She blocked Ethan's number before she could change her mind. Didn't trust herself not to answer if he called, not to break down and tell him everything. Eleanor was right about one thing. Ethan didn't belong in her world. They had been two ships passing in the night, nothing more. But as she prepared breakfast for Sophie, Maya's hands trembled, and when her phone rang at 8, an unknown number she suspected was Ethan calling from another device, she let it go to voicemail. The following days were a kind of purgatory. Dr. Rashid called personally, voice full of contained admiration, to inform her that all of Sophie's treatments had been approved and prepaid by an anonymous benefactor. Sophie would start the new therapy Monday at a private clinic Maya had only seen from outside. "Mommy, why are you crying?" Sophie asked that night, her small fingers wiping tears Maya didn't realize were falling. "Because I'm happy, sweetheart," Maya lied, pulling her daughter into her arms. Very, very happy. Lies upon lies, building up until Maya couldn't remember where truth ended and fiction began. Ethan tried to contact her 6 times that first week. Text messages from different numbers, emails to her work address that she deleted without reading, even flowers delivered to the hospital with a card that said simply, "Please let me explain whatever Eleanor said." But there was no explanation that would change the facts. Sophie needed to live, and the price of Sophie's life was Ethan's heart. In the second week, Ethan's attempts stopped. Maya told herself it was relief she felt, not loss. He had moved on exactly as he should, exactly as she wanted. But at night, when Sophie slept and the apartment was too quiet, Maya caught herself thinking about that hour on the terrace, about the way Ethan's hand had fit in hers, about the vulnerability in his eyes when he confessed about dying, about the way he had looked at her during dinner as if she were something precious. Had it been real for him, or had it just been loneliness seeking any port in the storm? 3 weeks after disappearing from Ethan's life, Maya was working a night shift when Albert Grayson appeared in the ER, not as a patient this time, but as a visitor. He found her at the nursing station, his gentle face heavy with concern. "Miss Crawford, I need to talk to you. About Mr. Blackwell." Maya felt her heart tighten. "Albert, I can't. He's getting worse." Albert cut her off, his voice urgent. "The disease is progressing faster than doctors predicted. He stopped eating properly, stopped sleeping, just stays in the office, working on something obsessively. Eleanor is terrified, though she doesn't know the whole truth." "Why are you telling me this?" Maya whispered, though she knew. Some part of her always knew she couldn't stay away, not completely. "Because since you left, he's given up," Albert said simply. "Whatever you two had, fake or real, was the only thing keeping him fighting. Now that it's gone, he's just ... Letting go, Maya closed her eyes, sharp pain cutting through her. "I can't see him, Albert. I made a promise." "For Sophie, Eleanor offered you money to stay away," Albert said, not a question. "I recognize her tactic. She's done it before, with other people who tried to get close to Ethan. She's paying for Sophie's treatments. Without that, my daughter dies. And without you, Ethan dies. Maybe not in 6 months. Maybe in 6 weeks. Albert leaned forward. "You're a nurse, Miss Crawford. You know what giving up does to patients? You've seen it happen. When they stop fighting, the body follows." It was true. Maya had seen it too many times. Patients who technically should survive, but didn't, because they had stopped wanting to live. Will mattered. Hope mattered. "What do you want me to do?" Maya asked, desperation bleeding into her voice. "I can't choose between them. I can't let my daughter die. I'm not asking you to." Albert placed an envelope on the desk between them. "I'm just asking you to read this. Ethan doesn't know I'm here, but he wrote something for you. You deserve to know the truth." Maya looked at the envelope as if it were a bomb. It probably was. Truths usually exploded carefully constructed lies into pieces. "Is he at the hospital now?" she asked. "No, at the office. Working on what I believe is some kind of medical research project. Hasn't slept in days." Albert stood to read the letter, Miss Crawford, then decide what to do. Maya waited until her shift ended to open the envelope. She sat in her car in the empty hospital parking lot at 4 in the morning, her hands shaking as she tore the paper. Ethan's handwriting was surprisingly legible for a man who had probably typed more than written by hand in the last 15 years. "Maya, I don't know if you'll read this. I don't know if Albert will manage to deliver it, or if you'll simply throw it away without looking, but I need to try. Eleanor offered you money to stay away, didn't she? I recognize the tactic. She's done it before, pushed away people she thought unsuitable for the Blackwell family. Usually, she was right. They were fortune hunters, opportunists, people who saw only the last name and never the person behind it. But you're different. I know that because you accepted her deal. Someone interested in money would have found a way to have both Eleanor's payment and access to me. You chose your daughter above everything, as you should, as I would have done in your place. I'm not writing to make you feel guilty. I'm writing because you deserve to know the truth I omitted that night on the terrace. Maya stopped reading for a moment, breathing deeply before continuing. There is an experimental treatment for my disease. My own company developed it, cutting-edge gene therapy. It's in phase 3 clinical trials, and the results are promising. It's not a cure, but it could give me years instead of months. I refused the treatment. You want to know why? Because it costs $3 million per patient. And if it works for me, it will work for hundreds of other people who can't pay. But if we approve it at that price, only billionaires will have access. More people will die because we made the cure exclusive. So I spent the last 3 years fighting against my own executive board, trying to find a way to mass-produce, reduce costs, make it accessible. I failed. They want profit. I want to save lives. We were at an impasse. Until I met you, seeing the way you fight for Sophie, the way every penny counts, the way the medical system fails people who need it most, reminded me why I started this fight. Not for me, for all the Sophies in the world. So I made a decision. I'm donating all my shares of Blackwell Pharmaceuticals to a foundation. Every penny of my personal billions will fund mass production of the therapy. Not just for me, for everyone who needs it. It will take 6 months to finalize legally. Coincidentally, exactly how much time the doctors gave me. But when I die, this treatment will be available at cost of production. Thousands of people will live because I chose not to hoard the cure. And here, as the part you need to know, I discovered Sophie is a candidate for the same gene therapy. Not leukemia specifically, but the delivery platform works for multiple cancers. Dr. Rashid knows this now. Eleanor doesn't. You can save your daughter without Eleanor's money, without sacrificing anything. Sophie enters clinical trials next week if you authorize it. Maya felt tears streaming down her face, blurring the words, I'm not asking you to come back to me. I'm not asking for anything. I just need you to know there's another path. You don't need to choose between Sophie and doing what's right. And you don't need to carry guilt for a charade I orchestrated. That night at dinner, the chemistry between us, that was real for me. For the first time in my life, I felt like someone saw me. Not the money, not the name, just Ethan. And it was terrifying and beautiful at the same time. But I understand why you left, and I don't blame you. Take care of Sophie, be happy, and know that meeting you changed everything. EPs if you wondering what I've been doing obsessively at the office, finalizing the legal papers. The foundation will be called the Sophie Crawford Fund for Accessible Gene Therapies. I thought she deserved to have something beautiful with her name, since she was the inspiration. Maya folded the letter with trembling hands, silent sobs shaking her body. He was giving up billions. He was dying so others could live. And he had named everything in honor of an 8-year-old girl he'd never met. She checked the time for 20 in the morning. The Blackwell Pharmaceuticals offices were 20 minutes away. If Ethan was really working nonstop, as Albert said, he'd still be there. Maya started the car before she could overthink it. Some decisions came from the head, some came from the heart, and some came from a deeper place, that place where you know, with absolute certainty, what's right, even when it's complicated. Eleanor had bought her silence, but she hadn't bought her conscience. The Blackwell Pharmaceuticals building was glass and steel, imposing even at 5 in the morning. Security almost didn't let her in until she mentioned Ethan's name. A call was made, and minutes later, she was going up to the 32nd floor. Ethan was in the corner office, surrounded by piles of legal documents, face illuminated by the cold light of the computer. He looked 10 years older than 3 weeks ago, deep circles under his eyes, thinner face, that feverish quality that comes from extreme exhaustion. He looked up when she entered, and something passed across his face. Hope followed quickly by fear, as if he didn't trust what he was seeing. Maya, her name came out rough, unused. You, ... Albert delivered the letter. I read it. She closed the door behind her, leaning on it for support. You're an idiot. Ethan blinked, clearly not expecting that. You're dying and spending your last months buried in paperwork. Giving up billions that could guarantee your own treatment, naming foundations after children you've never met. Maya crossed the room, each step fueled by fury and fear and something dangerously like love. You're completely, absolutely, nobly idiotic. Maya, I don't expect, and I'm an idiot too, she cut him off, stopping in front of his desk, for believing Eleanor, for thinking I had to choose, for disappearing without letting you explain. She took a deep breath. Sophie enters clinical trials. Next week, if you sign the papers, then I'll sign, and you're going to do your treatment too. Maya, it's $3 million. Then take the damn treatment at cost of production like everyone else. Maya slammed her hands on the desk. You fight for strangers, but not for yourself. Don't you see how wrong that is? Ethan was silent, just looking at her. Then, very quietly, no one has ever fought for me before. And there it was, the naked truth beneath all the wealth and privilege. A man so accustomed to being emotionally invisible, he didn't know how to let someone see him. Well, Maya said, her voice softening, get used to it, because now you do. 3 months passed in a blur of needles, medical protocols, and cautious hope. Sophie responded remarkably well to gene therapy, her blood levels improving each week, color returning to her cheeks, that spark in her eyes slowly reigniting. Dr. Rashid used words like promising and encouraging, and for the first time since diagnosis, Maya allowed herself to imagine a future where her daughter grew up, went to college, lived. Ethan, on the other hand, was getting worse. He had finally agreed to do the treatment, not on its own merits, but because Maya had made it clear that if he died from stubbornness, she would never forgive him. But gene therapy worked differently in each patient, and Ethan's Huntington was particularly aggressive. The tremors he had hidden so well were now impossible to ignore. His speech occasionally slurred. There were bad days where he could barely get out of bed. Maya was with him through everything, not as a nurse, though those skills were useful, but as the person who had become essential to his existence the same way he had become to hers. Eleanor had been furious when she discovered the resumed relationship, had threatened, bargained, finally begged. But when she saw how Ethan looked at Maya, how he fought harder on days she was there, how he truly smiled for the first time in years, something in Eleanor gave way. You love him, Eleanor had said one afternoon, not a question. Maya responded simply. It wasn't supposed to happen. But it did. Eleanor studied her for a long moment. And he loves you. Yes. Then I was wrong. The words seemed torn from Eleanor, but she said them anyway. About you being unsuitable, about this having no future. I was wrong, and I apologize. It wasn't complete forgiveness. Eleanor Blackwell didn't do complete apologies, but it was something, a beginning. Now, 8 months after that first call at 3 a.m, Maya sat beside Ethan's hospital bed. Not at St. Mary's, but in the private wing he had insisted on not using until Maya pointed out that if he died at home, Sophie would be traumatized. Always so practical, he had murmured. That crooked smile she had learned to love lighting his thin face. The treatment had bought time, not the miracle cure everyone hoped for, but precious months. And in those months, something extraordinary had happened. Ethan had begun to truly live, perhaps for the first time. He met Sophie, who immediately decided he was cool, for a rich adult. They played board games on his good days, watched movies on bad ones. Sophie did unsee a dying man. She saw her mother's friend, who did funny voices, and always let her win at Uno. He had bi-weekly dinners with Eleanor. Maya often joining. The meals were complicated, but real. No more masks, no more performances. Just a broken family trying to fix itself before it was too late. And he had Maya conversations until late hours. Hands intertwined in comfortable silences. Kisses that tasted simultaneously like beginnings and goodbyes. I have a request, Ethan said that afternoon, his voice weak but clear. Final this time, not as a transaction. Maya squeezed his hand. Anything, marry me. He said it so casually that for a moment Maya thought she had misheard. Not for show, not for Eleanor, just because I want you to be my wife for the days or weeks that remain. Tears burned Maya's eyes. Ethan, I know it's not fair to ask, he continued, words coming faster now, as if afraid of losing courage. I know I'm asking you to be a widow, practically before being a bride. But Maya, you taught me that time doesn't matter as much as what we do with it, and I want to spend every remaining second being your husband officially." "You're an idiot," Maya said through tears, but she was smiling. "Of course I'll marry you." The wedding happened a week later in the Blackwell Mansion garden. Small, intimate, just Eleanor, Sophie, Albert, a few close colleagues from Maya's hospital. Ethan was in a wheelchair by that point, but wore a perfectly cut suit and smiled as if he were the luckiest man alive. Sophie was the flower girl, wearing a dress she had chosen, bright blue, with enough tulle to satisfy any princess fantasy. She took the rings with solemn seriousness, then whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, "Now you're my stepdad." Cool. When the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," Ethan pulled Maya down and kissed her like a man with all the time in the world, though they both knew time was running out. "I love you," he whispered against her lips. "Thank you for teaching me how." "I love you too," Maya whispered back. "And you have to keep fighting for me, for Sophie, for all the patients who will benefit from your foundation." "I'll try," but there was something in his eyes, acceptance perhaps. Peace. The following months were stolen gifts. Some days Ethan was well enough to sit in the garden, Sophie reading books aloud, while Maya worked on her laptop. Other days he was barely conscious, but squeezed Maya's hand when she spoke, letting her know he was still there. The Sophie Crawford Fund for Accessible Gene Therapies officially launched. 750 patients were already enrolled for treatments they couldn't otherwise afford. Ethan's legacy was guaranteed, not in money or buildings, but in lives saved. And then, on a quiet Tuesday 9 months after that first impossible call, Ethan Blackwell died. Maya was holding his hand. Eleanor was on the other side. Sophie had left an hour earlier with Mrs. Chen. Ethan had insisted, not wanting her to see him at the end. "You fought," Maya whispered, as his breathing slowed. "Fought so bravely, and you changed everything, changed hundreds of lives. Changed mine?" He squeezed her hand one last time, so weak she almost missed it, and then he was gone. The funeral was immense. Hundreds of people Maya had never met, all sharing stories of how Ethan had touched their lives. Patients whose treatments he had funded, researchers whose work he had supported, ordinary people who had received his silent help over the years. "He was good," Eleanor said afterward, standing beside Maya looking at the grave. "Always was. Just needed someone to remind him of that." "He saved me too," Maya said quietly, "in ways I didn't realize I needed to be saved." 8 months later, Sophie was in complete remission. Doctors used words like miracle and revolutionary. Maya knew better. It was science, determination, and a man who had chosen to use his final months making the world better. She kept the Blackwell surname, worked part-time at St. Mary's, part-time managing Ethan's foundation. Sophie was back at school, making friends, living the childhood that had almost been taken from her. And some nights, when Sophie slept and the house was quiet, Maya took out that crumpled letter, the one Ethan had written, what seemed like a lifetime ago. She read his words, remembered his voice, and thanked the universe for a wrong call at 3 a.m, because sometimes mistakes lead us exactly where we need to be. And sometimes the most unlikely person becomes the most important. And sometimes, just sometimes, love finds a way even when every odd is against it. Maya Crawford Blackwell had entered an agreement out of necessity, had stayed for love, and in the end had gained not just her daughter's life, but a story that proved fairy tales exist. They just don't always end the way we expect. But they end exactly as they should.